All right.
Good evening and welcome. I want to thank everybody for attending tonight and for anybody who might be tuning in tonight. Starting with roll call, all board members are here and I need approval of the agenda.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Any public comments?
I did not see any for this meeting tonight.
Okay, perfect. So the first agenda is kind of a follow-up from the pre-COVID work that we were doing on the referendum, and I'll just hand it over to Randy.
All right, awesome. Rebecca, if you can pull up where we're at. Oh, awesome. I got it from there. All right, very good. First of all, what we're going to do tonight is on our agenda, we have a few different things. We're going to start off with a review of where we left off February of 2020. So that was really the last time we were together talking about facility planning as a large group. We're also going to then move into, we're going to do a complete review. We have our EUA team and members of our Vogel team here to help with our presentation tonight. Robin Savola, Chris Michaud, Andy Lyons in the back, and then we have Jay from Vogel and also Eric Balwick here as well from Vogel. So we'll be walking through our presentation today to really bring us up to speed. Our whole purpose for this part of the presentation and this part of our meeting this evening is really as a reintroduction. Brian and Ted didn't have the opportunity back in early 2020 to kind of go back through those tours that we were part of. So we did that a couple weeks ago. So I appreciate them making time where we spent about 2-3 hours just walking through our facilities so that you at least had a sense of what so you could see some of the things that we'll be talking about tonight. We're going to take about the next 45 minutes to an hour just to kind of walk through this. If there's questions or things that you have that just to help kind of spark your memory as we go through it, please stop us and we'll absolutely address those things as we move forward. What we're looking for tonight as an outcome is really that this is a informational meeting. It's really to just kind of reground us. There's not a point where you need to make a decision as far as what we're doing or what our next piece is, other than giving us some guidance as far as what are some informational pieces or some next steps you'd like to see, and maybe some timelines as far as when we would like to do that. And we'll talk more about that as we get through the evening, but you're not going to be in a position where we're asking you for a direction on any plan or any of those type of pieces. It's really an informational regrounding of where we're at so that we can build our foundation off of that. Following our presentation here tonight, because we're going to take us up to where we left off in February, March of 2020, then Mark Roffers is going to be joining us. Mark is our urban planner we've been working with for a number of years, and he will do a presentation that's just going to update us on growth in our community. He has talked to all of our developers. He looked at our birth rates, kind of re-updated his report that he's given us. So that'll give us kind of a status quo piece as far as what's currently happened over the last 18 months, how has pandemic impacted growth in our community. He has not updated the enrollment projections because one of the unknowns we have is kind of what's going to happen as we hit enrollment in the fall. So that'll be a piece that we'll re-engage with him and with us internally to really look at how that plays forward. But I think after our presentation here and then Mark discussing, I'd like to then just open it up for some discussion as far as what do you see as some of the next steps. We'll lay out some timelines and options, at least for us to be thinking about and provide some guidance. So that's kind of the landscape of the first part of our meeting. So with that, we have our introductions. This is a good one. Oops, here we go. And I'm going to move us over to Robin, who's going to talk a little bit about the process that we've used and that they've established as one of our team leaders.
Yeah, so I'm Robin Savola from Epstein Union Architects. I'm just going to kind of talk a little bit about what we've done in the past with you guys, and both in the 2019, 2020, but also back for the 2014 referendum. Really, it's just sort of starting broad, learning about all of the concerns and goals of the district, such as enrollment and growth, maintenance needs, perhaps new programs that are coming in, all of that kind of balance. Really, we start with meeting with the district staff, learning about what your needs and goals are, then developing it into some options. That is sort of pushed out to, again, some community engagement and staff input. Then we sort of developed solutions. And then that came into a master plan back for the 2014 referendum. So if we could just go to the next slide. Just a quick recap, in 2014, we did a addition and renovation onto Prairie. We also did a renovation over at Heritage, and then the new intermediate school, as well as some capital maintenance needs as well at that point. Let's go to the next one. Thank you. But really, it was set up as a long-term, master plan. So long-range master plan. So really, we're just trying to get the needs as they arise, really. And there are still some capital maintenance items that still need to be addressed. As the years go by, more things are coming up, as expected, as life expectancy of products, and equipment comes due. But also just sort of modernizing learning environments more broadly outside of the new buildings. And then preparing for future enrollment and growth. So, next slide.
All me.
Yeah.
Dave J. Thompson with Older Brothers. So what you see in front of you is just a high-level analysis of the long-term capital maintenance needs. We've reviewed this pretty closely with John and the team here and the EUA team. And we've developed what we call a low end and a high end. So the low end being just under 25 million at that 24.8, and the high end being 31.2 million. When we evaluated that, what we looked at is that list of items are priced right now to be done individually. So there's a lot of economies of scale. So for instance, if you replaced your lights and your ceiling at the same time with maybe some low voltage wiring that needs to be replaced, there's a lot of economies of scale that can be had by combining certain like items. And that's how we came up with that low end of the range. We also looked at items that maybe at or coming up on their useful life, but there's no need to replace it because it's still fine and functioning, and so it wouldn't make sense to spend dollars on those items. So that's how you come up with the low range. The high range is really looking at doing pretty much everything on that list. And again, that list is going to have anything that's at or near its useful life, beyond it, or will be within the next 5 years. And so this gives you a good range, and then as you get further on tonight, we lay out some of the pathways. Of course, if there's a decision to do renovations in certain facilities, there's going to be items that will come off of the capital maintenance needs and be part of that renovation.
Just to add on to what Jay said, one of the things you remember is we've put together a 20-year facility maintenance plan. So when he's talking about this is built off the first 5 years, it's built off of the items that we have collectively put onto that 20-year plan and identifying the first 5 years as kind of a starting point. I believe the other piece that we talked about, Jay, was if you go back to like last February, we talked about a facility number of about 20 million.
Right.
Now that also at that point did not include anything with Heritage, because at that point we were looking at options for Heritage. So this is really a standalone number that incorporates all of the facilities and doesn't break anything out for relation to any other project.
Right. There was some middle school stuff too that was included that wouldn't have been addressed here. So
Right.
That's how we came up with it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you, Jay. All right. One of the things that we also talked about as we were moving.
Do the question later, or how do you want to?
You can jump in whenever you're ready.
So, with that number, I know that includes equipment and actual facility enhancement. So with the markup in building costs since April last year, I'm guessing the number isn't 30% more, but do you have a guesstimate about, would it be a 15%? Is that a reasonable consideration? Is that just throwing a dart?
Well, no, I should have fallen asleep when I took my econ class in college about post-pandemic construction. But I figured we'd get to that question at some point tonight, so that's a great question. You know, what we can do is look at data we have, so if you go back a year from now to today, or even January when we updated all the pricing that we presented. If you use the ENR, which is Engineering News Record Cost Indices, which are pretty well accepted throughout the industry, it'd be about an 8.7%. Now, obviously certain things like wood, which I'm sure everyone's familiar with, steel, other commodities have gone up way more than 8.7. But when you look at it as a whole across the various parts of work, I think 8 to 10% would probably be accurate. It gets you to today. Now, obviously, the magic question is
On the road.
once we start talking timing and some of that stuff later on today, and then you say, okay, referendum of whatever date, and then the work is actually, it gets a little tougher to project, obviously, but I would say 10% would probably be.
Okay, thank you.
And these are updated with you said you updated these just within the last few months. Really.
Yeah, the maintenance stuff, but when we get onto the pathways, those we haven't touched.
We did not, yeah, so that's a good distinction. The maintenance items you're seeing in front of you right here are more 2021 numbers. The ones that you'll see later on in the presentation are just static numbers from back in February of 2020 when we last left off. All right, excellent. All right. The next piece is just kind of a reminder of some of the things that we're keeping in mind as we're looking at some of the projects. As Robin has shared, the part of our process is working with our staff to determine kind of how do you use space so that then we can design space that works around how we're teaching kids. Modern learning environments, as you look at things like the intermediate school, amenities that we've added to Prairie, things when we renovated things at Heritage, Arboretum School, absolutely have some of those more modern breakout rooms, more flexibility in furniture. Those are some of the things that we're certainly putting a focus on as we continue to look at renovations or any construction of new facilities. So it's just kind of a reminder of some of the pieces that there's a space issue, there's also a why that needs to be answered as far as how you can enhance things from an instructional standpoint. Again, after we're finished going through this slide deck on marker offers, we'll go through what's happening with growth. But this is just a piece to say that one of the things we're also factoring in is how is the growth impacting us as a school district, and what are some of our needs based on student enrollment growth that's occurring and has continued to occur within our community. This is just a piece that we needed really a placeholder for as we walked into the presentation. We're talking a lot about pathways that deal with growth and needs for facilities to adapt to larger numbers of students. This slide just represents that there's also some other instructional pieces that we'll be addressing as we go into the conversations. And then we're not going to go into this in depth, but it's just something to keep in mind, particularly as you see some of the bar chart that we use later on in the presentation. Some of the items incorporated in those spreadsheets involve some of the renovations that we're also looking at the high school from an instructional standpoint. And I think at this point I'm kicking it over to you, Chris. Is that correct?
No, you're going to take this one too.
Oh, I can take this one too. No, I got you. Yeah. Robin described the first phase that we went through, which was our 2014 referendum. This was really kind of outlining what were we looking at in 2020. And if you look at this, the pieces that kind of the chess pieces on the board were addressing Heritage Elementary and either renovation, tear down and rebuild, or a complete rebuild. Those are the options that we had kind of placed out there. The concept of a new middle school to replace our current middle school, making then the current middle school part of the high school campus. Looking at district-wide maintenance, which included the maintenance list you saw prior, some administrative office space, some of the needs that we have out at this building, and then also from an operational standpoint and exceeding the revenue cap, which would be a second type of a referendum question, to deal with additional costs with adding space to our facilities, and then also looking at what other costs are associated with operating the district in the way that we want it to operate. So you have to ask two questions when you look at a referendum package like this. One is for the capital maintenance piece, or the capital piece, anything we're building. And then the second question is an exceeding the cap for operations. So like when we when we built the intermediate school, we added space to our facilities. The first question was with regards to building that school. The second question then allowed us to then operate that school with heating, cooling, and all the associated amenities that go with it. So you needed really both to go hand in hand. So that's why you see that last gear off to the right is really to articulate that you need to also consider the operational side of any of the decisions that we're making. So this was kind of the pathway that we had laid out and where we were really kind of framing up the work that we have in front of us here tonight. The other place we left off was when were we looking at a referendum? Initially, we were looking at somewhere in this November 2020 timeframe. Where we actually left off was at the point where we had identified the main components that we thought were pertinent for us to have a broader conversation community-wise in order to narrow down our scope in order to be prepared for a fall of 2020 referendum. Obviously, that didn't, so that's just the framework of where we're kind of leading you tonight. So the place that this presentation will fall off is at the point then where we were going to take this to the community, get some feedback through some workshop type of setups to learn about what are your thoughts on Heritage Middle School renovations, building, location, facility maintenance, all of those pieces, so that then we could further narrow that down to bring forth the referendum questions in the fall. So that's just kind of the timeline of where we were. We actually left off there, and about that 2020, we were in the, trying to think where we did leave off. It was in that February timeframe, right? February and March, right in there is where we kind of left off. But this was our schematic, is what we were pulling from. All right. Some of the things that we've talked about with regards to how do we move forward with these projects, certainly wanting to articulate our vision, looking at what were some of our key drivers as far as making decisions, putting together our planning team and giving directions to that, and then evaluating and assessing kind of how we're going to make that occur. The primary principles that we agreed to around this table going into this process was certainly wanting to look at enrollment growth, looking at a long-term approach, not just a piecemeal piece, but be able to give a vision for if this, then what comes next, which is what we've been working on since probably 2012, and where all of these slides really kind of work together. The decisions we made at the 2014 referendum impact where we are today and will impact where we move in the future. Looking at equitable facilities, I think that was a piece that we heard community-wise, particularly as we looked at like Heritage, one of our older buildings. How do we create a more consistent learning environments and amenities across our district? The capital maintenance piece we've already talked about. Deliver this in value in an affordable and responsible way to our taxpayers, and reflecting community values, which is some of the pieces we get when we start doing the workshops with our stakeholders. So those were the pieces that we left off on, and will be a point where we're going to need to revisit these as we move forward. But I believe these are very similar ones to what we had in 2014 as well. So that leads us up to, and now I'm going to turn it over to you, Chris, sorry. And what Chris has really been very great with, he's been part of our, working in our district for a number of years, through all of the different iterations and planning phases from the last referendum up until now. So many of the things that you're going to see right now were part of the work that we put together that he's presented to the board. So I'm going to let him walk through the next number of slides to really kind of reorientate us of where we left off.
Thanks, Randy. Thanks for having us here. Chris Michaud with UA. And, right now I'm going to go through kind of where we were last year. So for people there, hopefully this is a good refresher. And one of the things that was really dictating a lot of the conversation last time was this decision about Heritage. Heritage kind of had to be sort of this first step in understanding what the challenges were at Heritage. So Heritage obviously is one of your older facilities in the district, as the original school was part of it. So looking at that comprehensively and the maintenance that was required to bring that building up to speed, not only from just an old building, but also from the fact that there's portions of that building that are inaccessible. There are entire systems on that building that need to be replaced. But then also looking at the whole idea of equity, those guiding principles that were just discussed, and how do you create modern learning environments within this facility that reflect the current state of modern learning environments, for instance, at intermediate school, and then going forward from there. And so it was important to understand what are the options that we can do at Heritage. What do those look like from an end of project school? What do those look like from a cost point of view? And what are the differences between those as we evaluate those options? So Randy, if you would go to the next slide. The next couple slides, really, I'm going to walk you through kind of the iteration of the different options we discussed. The first option essentially took the approach of they're going to renovate the elementary school as it is. There's no additions to it. You're going to take that building, you're going to gut it where it needs to be gutted, renovate it, replace the systems, enlarge the windows and so forth. And at the end of the day, when you look at that, even if you try to renovate that facility, you're still left with learning environments that might not be equitable to some of the other districts or other schools in your district. But you're also, working with a lot of money being invested in a facility and maybe it's not getting exactly what you want. From there, we looked at option 2, which is to say, let's take the most challenged parts of this facility, which is the old original high school portion of the north, and demolish that, and then rebuild a new portion of the building there, which would entail the gyms and supporting educational space. But then at the south end of the building, then do a smaller addition for a kindergarten classroom. And the rationale here was, we're going to try to salvage the main part of the building, which we feel is the youngest part of the building, but maybe one which we can work with the best because it doesn't have some of the inherent challenges of that northern part of the building. And then minimize the amount of new construction on the site and try to see where that gets us from a cost point of view. When we looked at these two options, at the end of the day, the board decided to say it might not be worth spending this amount of money for this outcome. So we'll go to the next slide. As part of this, we had two additional options. I'll keep going down the line here. Option 3 was to say, hey, let's demolish a little bit more of that building to the north. So the original high school and then the 2-story addition, which essentially brings you all the way to the 1-story addition where the existing main office and entrance to Heritage is. And you say that all gets demolished. And then what you do is you build a 2-story addition to the east of that, southeast, create a new entrance onto the building. Here you're creating probably more than half of the building, or more than half of the building will be new construction. And now you begin to get into that range of, we're starting to provide an equitable solution that addresses where we want to go forward. And then the fourth option was to say, let's build an entirely new elementary school on the site behind the existing building. And once that building is finished, we'll tear down the original Heritage Elementary in front of it. And there's obviously benefits to that because at the end of the day, you have a brand new facility. You can construct a building while you're currently operating another building as well. So that worked out as well. There was one in these meetings that we're having, if you recall, where the board, where you guys came up with an option. And that's option 5. And it was the question that raised, historically the master plan that we initially developed back in 2014 said, we're going to put an intermediate school out on site, out on Woodland Drive. And then at some point down the future, we're going to build a middle school there. So eventually that becomes a 5, 6, 7, 8 campus. And the question came up is, hey, does it make sense to think about building an elementary school on that site? One of the reasons is that, one, you're building less building with an elementary school. It just physically doesn't need to take up as much space. So if you think about the middle school and maybe some of the exterior requirements that middle school might have with regards to practice space and things like that, when you put a larger building on the site, you're restricting out a little bit more, and it becomes a little bit tighter, right? And maybe even a little challenge on it. So, the other thing is that and Randy speak up, but the middle school and intermediate school kind of run on the same bell schedule, correct?
Correct.
And we all know that there's current challenges at that site with regards to traffic. So essentially doubling that load at the site at the same time was something which we need to be really careful of doing that. So does it make sense to put a school on a site that has a different bell schedule to try to alleviate that congestion? So we thought there was a lot of sense to this. So the fifth option was, let's put an elementary school on the site. From a construction staging too, it also allows you to be a little bit more flexible because you can operate in heritage as long as you want until there's some development.
So when you look at this, you know, I've heard the congestion out there. What can we do to the site to improve or minimize congestion? And two, change the belt schedule. You know,
I think those are all things that would have to be investigated. I mean, part of the bell schedule is also bus capacity routes. So it's trying to look at kind of both of those. So I think as we kind of vet these aspects out, I think these are the three options that we had kind of left with when we were in February. These are what we're going to be then led into really a workshop with the community to kind of have that discussion as far as what are some of the things that we need to consider. But what Jack's bringing up is accurate. I mean, there's other ways to address congestion. One is kind of the bell schedules, and is there another way you kind of configure those? And then the other aspect is obviously how do you like how the building fits on the site, and how does that flow? And they're a little bit different because this building has a little bit smaller footprint than what that middle school does that you'll see in a few minutes. So those are going to be pieces that we're going to have to bring back here, and there are also pieces I would see that need to be part of our community dialogue around some of these options.
I think the other thing you got to look at though too, and we've had this conversation, is when you look at the housing stock, you know, the housing stock in that heritage area lends itself, you know, to entry-level kids and so forth. You know, the housing stock that is going to go around this building is going to be in the $450,000 to $500,000 range. That's not an entry. That's generally not, you know, affordable for.
It would probably still service the same attendance area. It's just a matter, is it a walkable or is it a busable option? So that's part of what you run into. And I think that's part of the question then too, is if you did follow something like this, it then brings forth the question of what goes on the place in the center of town. And when we did our surveys back in 2012, 2013 with the community, there was value in keeping a school in the center part of town. So that was definitely something that was a value that I think we would have to kind of reconsider as we look at all of the options in front of us.
So the next couple options have to do with the middle school. And the first two, essentially option one and option two, are essentially the same thing. It's putting the middle school on the intermediate site. The only difference between the two is in option one, we would design a facility for 800 students and design it so it could take a future expansion. If you remember, this is the same approach we took with the intermediate school. And you can even see in the graphic there's a little dashed in, plugged up area there at the west end of the building where we anticipate that additional building. And option two said, no, you build the whole building right now. And at that point, when we convened last 2020, it was a decision to say, let's take the route of the 800 students. We don't need to build that much at this point. We feel it'll be more economical and a better decision to do something a little smaller. But then also, tiered with that idea that you put an elementary school on the site, we then came up with the option for, what's the third option for a middle school if it's not going to go on the intermediate school site? And the option here would be, you tear down the heritage school in its entirety and you build a middle school on the site there. So one, that begins to talk about the community's desire to have a school at the center of the community. Two, it obviously works with phasing, but you need to think about the parts that occur. So first you build a middle school, then you take one down, then you build, or first you build an elementary school, then you take heritage down, then you can build a middle school. These aren't These aren't projects that occur at the same time. And that may work with the way things pan out in your district. So, and that's, I think, Mark Rockford will help give you some information as to what the need is at that point from an enrollment point.
The other piece we talked about when we were looking at middle school was where do all of the like extracurricular athletic programs take place? One of the things that we do not have, we have the athletic field in here at the,
Yep, there you
right
go.
there. Sorry, I was in the holding pond there for a second. But I'm not an architect,
So nice.
guys. So you have the athletic field over here at the intermediate school site, but there's not any other place to add additional, you can't put another track out there or some of the other places. So you'd have to bring kids most likely back into, back in by the high school, by the current middle school area to participate where there's some of the green space. Your other option is you look at purchasing additional green space where they can go. One of the things that was discussed when this option was tossed out there was if you put the middle school currently where the current heritage sits, there are some aspects of the original high school fields that are still there that could then be utilized, which is where our middle school students are now. Those are some pieces that we have to also look at as part of the conversation and the puzzle as we make some of those decisions.
So those were the elementary or the heritage and middle school. As Randy indicated earlier, there are parts of the high school that you guys are looking at that are, areas where you want to make improvements. And as part of this, we're like, let's begin to see what that looks like. So, on this particular image here, we talked about work being done in the small auditorium up at the north end of the building. We looked at, a refresher and furniture upgrades to the LMC. We looked at a planning office type area just off the cafeteria and the upper level that could be repurposed for better use for students and staff. The one where we spent a decent amount of time had to do with this sort of Fab Lab tech area where there's really a lot of traction and a lot of things happening there of wanting to sort of overhaul that area, make it safer, make it more visible, make it, something more in tune with what's currently happening in that Fab Lab space, try to tie all those spaces together. There's also some other spot renovation work, incorporating a family changing area down by the pool, which is currently lacking right now. And as we scroll to the next slide, there are a couple of things on the site. So one of the challenges with site athletics is the fact that athletes need to go through the school to access locker rooms, which is not very good. So looking at building team rooms and locker room facility closer to the outdoor athletics, what does that look like? Expanding the bleachers was another one that came up. And then as you begin to look at the existing middle school, what are some of the things that need to occur at that facility? And one of the things which comes up, which is not in line with any of your other schools, is how people enter and access the school. So this looked at putting the new entrance and administrative addition onto the front of that, so you could initiate a secure entry sequence at that facility, and then backfilling the space within it with support space for the school. As you begin to think about what happens down the line, and let's say you build a new middle school, and this school now gets utilized by the high school in some capacity. How do they go from one school to the other? Are they walking across? So Jay looked at a skywalk bridge or some type of connection which goes between the two facilities. So we began looking at a lot of these ideas. There were some which were very well received, it seemed like, some which we needed to pause on because we don't really have all the answers right now. All right, if we go to the next slide, a couple of the remainder things we talked about here. This is looking at the TLC building. Again, if a new middle school comes online and you're beginning to think about what do you use the existing middle school for, some of the programs that are in TLC might work well over at the existing middle school building. You also are currently leasing space for your district health clinic. So we looked at whether or not it makes sense to put your health clinic down here in the lower level of TLC. So that was one thing which we explored. I don't think we have a slide for it, but we also looked at just briefly a couple of the things at district office here that might be needed in terms of a couple extra office space. Like that. So we took all these options. We can go to the next slide. And we had a nice working session, and we used what's up on the screen. It's like a spreadsheet calculator. And essentially, what that allowed us to do is begin to look at all these different sort of areas, whether it's Heritage Elementary School, whether it's a middle school, whether it's Worthington High School, and begin to selectively, sort of a la carte fashion, create different pathways to put together possible scenarios of how you might move forward, or at least ask the community what they might support. I think in the end, we developed 6 different pathways. So maybe
Those are all printed in their packet, so they do have it. We just put one in here for illustrative purposes. But yeah, this was a process we went through, and I think what we articulated was kind of what things were in, what were out, and then you kind of, you look at it in comparison to the first 2 boxes really up here, being your heritage and middle school, and different ways to configure that. And then the board at that point had figured out which of these items, which were our variables at the middle school and high school that we wanted in. We used those as a constant moving forward. And I think at that time also we had 20 million in the facility maintenance, which was also a constant.
So those that, regardless of the pathway, those stay the same. I think sort of the bottom half. And if you go to the next slide, so just kind of a little bit of a recap. You know, this came out of a culmination of, you know, EUA and global meeting with the school district, sitting down with principals. We hosted a couple board meetings on site at Heritage and at the middle school, if you remember. So really understanding the challenges that are inherent at the schools, walking the facilities, using that knowledge that you see firsthand to help develop those pathways. And as we go to the last slide, I think the last slide is just the 6 pathways that were arrived at. And you should probably scroll down just maybe a little bit. Randy mentioned this a little bit earlier. So this is the instance where the information on this slide is from 2020. So the prices that you see there are old prices. The dates and construction timelines and so forth are old. But these are the pathways, and you can begin to see. You know, if you look in the heritage column, or if you look in the middle school column, you can see the different ways in which these pathways are constructed. So for instance, pathways 1 and 2 said, hey, we're not going to build a middle school right now. We're going to wait till a later time to be determined in order to initiate that portion of the phase. You know, and then you can go down, there's a little clip there which indicates sort of a little bit of a change which occurs with Heritage either being built at the intermediate site or Heritage being built at its existing, or the middle school being built at the Heritage site. So. Anything else, Randy? Otherwise, I think I'll probably kick it back to you for the next couple of slides.
Super. Yeah, so this slide is really just kind of laying out there what are those critical questions that we have to answer. So kind of taking into account all the different pieces that we've just gone through very quickly in the last half hour. The one question is, do you look at renovating or expanding Heritage, or do you construct a new Heritage Elementary? That's one of the big questions, that's one of the big rocks we have to deal with. 2 is the middle school now, or do you do that at some point in the future? So timing of kind of the middle school piece, as far as when you build that school, and then also when that becomes part of the high school. Kind of our strategic approach to how do we want to approach our facility maintenance. And we put forth a package or a view that was like taking the first 5 years and addressing those pieces throughout 20, 25, or I think up to that $31 million item. And then level of renovation out here, there's some space and needs that we have out here, but also looking at the high school, which has some instructional componentries to it, how we would reallocate some of the space out at the TLC, potentially being able to move rental space into district-owned space and save some dollars on an annual basis there. So these are kind of the 4 primary critical areas that as we kind of left our work back in February 2020, these are what we were going to be vetting out community-wise and bringing forward some of those diagrams that were showed in the last few minutes, get feedback on them. We then would have conversation here. That was going to then move into and help to inform a community survey, which would then further narrow pieces down, leading into then a final decision by the school board as far as what that plan would be referendum-wise. So one of the questions that kind of remains in front of us is, these are still the primary questions that exist. So they really haven't shifted a lot. There are some things that we need to track, which is what's happening with enrollment. Obviously, our enrollment dipped a little bit this year, but what's going to happen in the fall? And how will that projection be then moving forward? So that's one of the questions that we still have to answer. But to give you kind of done just a sense of what these different timelines look like, included in your packet, and I believe printed in your packet in front of you, we've laid out 3 different just projected timelines where you kind of work backwards. And you start to say, if a referendum takes place at X time, what things have to be in place in order for that to occur? So we really laid out 3 different options here. One being a spring of 22, one being fall of 22, and then one being spring of 23. So those would be the next 3 different election cycles that we could consider. And then you just see really a very high-level chart that shows you how we have to move forward as far as making decision points with regards to that. So I think as we start to look forward as a district, and not only the 4 questions that we posed that were our critical big areas of decision, it also plays into our timing for when we would want to move forward, how quickly we'd want to do that, and then the timelines that are associated with it. So,
Before you hop off timelines, Randy, is there any one of these timelines that's unattainable?
it's unattainable. I think the one that gets into probably spring of 22 is a little tight, but that's just from the standpoint of, I think one of the variables we don't necessarily have the information to inform that I know the board's going to want is really where's the enrollment piece for the fall. So once we'll have that in September, it's not completely unattainable, Dave, in that we can turn that over, but it's going to put us under a very tight timeline then to jump off where we were last February, to do a good job with that community engagement, and it'll really put a target to our fall will be facility planning with the community. So I think that's a question not necessarily as much as it is a timeline issue, but it's also, is that the right time given as we're coming into the next school year? So from my lens, there's 2 questions to that. One is making sure that you can meet the timeline, which will be tight. I think it's feasible, but it's tight. And the second part is at the right time, just community-wise, to be having that dialogue. And then the other ones, obviously, I think are probably ones that are absolutely easily attainable with regards to, I think, both of those issues.
Although when we suspended this last time, it would have been roughly the same time frame.
Correct. Correct.
Okay.
So that's, it's definitely, there's none of these that I think aren't attainable from just a strategic piece when you look at the dates. I think we can do that, but it's going to put certainly some of the work that we have to put together, we'll have to start working on over this summer to get prepared in order to make that successful for the summer. So that is a piece we do need some feedback on, and will really impact us over the next couple months to be prepared for that if for example, a spring of 22 were decided. But what I've done is I've also added a kind of a, I don't want us to kind of get into a piece tonight where you have to be making decisions. I want you to kind of be able to let this sink in. I do have an agenda item where we can discuss this again next Monday on the 14th. And I think that's a key piece that we're going to want some feedback on and direction. But we do have all 3 of the charts that are in there that kind of outline those pieces. So from Vogel or EUA's perspective, going back to Dave's question, is there a feedback item that you would provide as far as the timelines and the impacts on the process? See Andy's jumping forward here. This is Andy Lyons.
Hi, Andy Lyons from EUA. Hi there, Dave. Thanks for the question. I would add one thing to that. I would say that in other districts where we're working that are targeting that, that April 22 timeline, they're starting to narrow towards a final scope already, so they can begin to test that scope at survey. So they're getting close to a handful of different final options. So if you think of where you're at right now in comparison, you're not quite there yet. So I would say that April is a challenge in comparison to some of those other districts that are well on their way.
I would say you had a good point about the time from now to referendum is similar to what it was when we left this process. The one difference that does make it a little bit tighter is the not knowing the enrollment intel.
Yeah.
At that time, you knew what the assumed enrollment was, obviously without COVID being consideration. So it's just that key thing, that if you're making decisions, you may be needing to backtrack on a few depending on some of the enrollment projections.
If you had a really well-defined scope and you had a business case that supported that scope, I think, yes, absolutely. April is well within the realm of possibilities at this point, because you've got plenty of time to develop survey and develop the information campaign to support whatever flows from that survey. But the challenge is we're not quite there yet in terms of defining the business case yet.
So if you look at like a spring 22 referendum, you'd have to have the resolutions in front of the board probably at the January board meeting. So that's kind of the timeline of when you would actually have to have those approved in this place, where we would have to have the exact language that we're going to be moving forward to the community. So that would have to happen by statute in January.
It essentially compresses your fall.
What's that?
It essentially compresses your fall.
Yeah, it takes your fall, so you're gonna have to have those decisions really decided before you hit the holidays, because once we come back into January, you're gonna be having to make that decision. That's, I think, what makes it probably tight with our pieces.
Does it matter when you would break ground, if it was spring or fall of 2022? I mean, is it gonna still be?
It kind of depends on the project, I think, for one. So it takes 9 to 12 months to design. And then, so if you're looking out where you end with bid time at that point, you're probably getting in the ground, the following spring?
Yeah, unless we did an early
Yeah.
package in the fall, we targeted that. But
Yeah, there's ways you can accelerate it, like Jay said, with an earlier bid package, things like that. It is 9 to 12 months, depending on the size of the school, things like that, for design. And then really there's about 2 months for state review process right now and bidding. So it's, 11 to 14 months. So November could put you back into,
But if we were doing renovations, that wouldn't happen, start at least during school year.
Correct.
yes.
Right.
So if we're building brand new at either location, well, behind or next to, then it doesn't matter.
Right,
You
so
could break
then,
ground earlier.
yeah, if you're building brand new, then you're just waiting for thaw, so about April.
Okay.
Correct.
Get your question? Any other questions at this point as far as what you've seen? Just want to make sure that you're having a good sense of what was presented and kind of at least trying to catch you up to where we left off here 16 months ago. All
all right.
Yep. All right, I think what we're gonna do then, Mark, I'm gonna have these guys step back and introduce Mark Roffers. Mark's been in front of us a number of times over the last number of years. I think we've been working with you probably since 2011 or 12, somewhere in there.
2004.
2000, that's where we initially started.
Yeah,
right?
whenever you.
That was when you were with another firm. at
That's
that
right.
time. That's right, yeah. But Mark was a big part of kind of our work as we went into building the intermediate school, certainly with the process that we've kind of created in front of us. And every few years, we kind of come back and Mark helps us to kind of get a better sense of really what's happening community-wise so that we can make some decisions based on what's potential growth. Now, I did not have Mark do enrollment projections update for this report. That's a piece that we feel we would do again after we got to September so we could get a sense of where those pieces were. So Rebecca, I'm going to have you kind of pull up Mark's report, and I'm going to actually hand you my model.
Sounds real good,
You can
Randy.
kind of work through it.
Yep. Yeah, I know almost all of you, but I come back every year and a half, and there's a couple new faces, and that's good stuff too. But yeah, I've been working here for the district for 15, 16 years now on various projects. I think we're on we projected enrollment twice during that period of time at least over the last 10 years. You're going to see some of the results of that here tonight. I also work for, based on a launching pad, frankly, from this school district, a number of other suburban districts in Dane County. So I've got a pretty good sense of the housing market and what's happening here and how, what's going on with, for example, Tierney subdivisions here might relate to Tierney subdivisions into Forest or other communities, which is very helpful. I'm an urban planner by training, so am trained to try to understand the housing and development market and think about the future, how perilous that has become over the last year and a half. So this is just an overview of where I think the community's growth is occurring and how that relates to projections we have made in the past and where it might lead us in the future.
If I can clarify just one thing, as we start looking at any numbers that Mark is putting out there, because there are some places where you do have some enrollment numbers in there. Those are resident enrollment numbers, correct?
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
a little different than like ones that you might see like us put forth, because we're looking at number of kids in a seat. Mark's looking at number of kids that live in Waunakee. So as you have families that might choose to go open enrollment in or out, those aren't accounted for. That's kind of a variable that he's kind of remained constant with, is staying with resident enrollment. That's a little bit different.
That is accurate, and as you also know, you're a net open enrollment in district, so to the extent that you do have more kids coming in than leaving, that'll be added to the numbers you see here tonight.
Mark?
And so just a quick question, I think I know the answer, but when you do a projection, for example, for your 2017, does that take into account potential move-ins beyond kindergarten, or do you could just kind of extrapolate from kindergarten enrollments, but based on residential?
It considers move-ins, later in their career as well as kids growing up into the district.
Okay, so if a kindergarten enrollment might be stagnant, then we know we need more move-ins later in the process.
That's right. And you typically do have growth, occurring from grade to grade. I was just looking at that issue, and in a normal year, it might be 10 kids that you add each year as they progress through the grade groups. And those are mostly move-ins, of course,
Right. Okay.
that are coming to the district. Historically, new houses bring along little kids, no kids, or kids on the way. They don't more rarely bring in middle or high school kids. People, and it makes kind of intuitive sense. People have kind of locked into a particular community or a particular district, and it would require a job relocation or something to bring them to your district. That could change, and we can see some of that changing with the pandemic effects and other things. But that historically has been the case.
Thanks, Mark.
Okay. So Rebecca, you can go ahead and move.
Yeah.
Oh, I've got control. Sorry.
Okay, you just gotta move it over, there you go, onto the middle, onto the slide, and you can roll.
See the little mouse right up here?
Okay.
Right there.
So now I'm going to have to put my glasses on and fog up.
Actually, Mark, if you just put the cursor in the middle of it and use the roller ball in the middle, it'll roll for you.
Excellent. All right. now I'm with you. All right, so what I'd like to talk about is a update on housing and demographic change in your district, audit or kind of check our enrollment projections from the past against reality, and then just offer some conclusions for you to consider. First off, talking a little bit about the housing market. It is dynamic, and the effects that you hear about costs affecting your bottom line, if it's affecting the housing bottom line, but at the same time we have a huge unmet demand for housing of all types in our county. The housing starts over the last 15 years have been focused a little bit away from Waunakee to municipalities that are closer to the capital. Waunakee had its real heyday in terms of single-family housing construction, at least between 1995 and 2005. It's been steady since 2010. You're not falling off the map. But other communities like Middleton, City of Madison, Sun Prairie, Verona have had bigger housing unit growth since that time. Since 2010, and I'll provide the numbers here, single-family starts have been steady within your district, mostly focused within the village. Multiple family starts are up, and that tends to come in big clumps, right? You have 200 units one year, 0 units the next year, things like that. We have tremendous job growth in our county. Companies like Epic Systems, the makers of Cologuard, have just exploded in certain cases from 19 employees for Exact Sciences up to several thousand here today, most of them in Dane County. That's created a huge shortage of housing within our county. It's good news, but it's the housing market has been slow to respond based on a lot of different factors. And that's created an increasing gap and a shortage of both owner and renter occupied units, and particularly for the service and manufacturing workforce in our county. Zooming into the district as a whole, as I mentioned, the peak years have still been between 1995 and 2005 for single family construction. Most of the people that bought those homes in that period of time are still here, but many of their kids have grown up or are growing up and out of the school system. That's an important thing to think about for enrollment projections today and potential enrollment turnover as we get especially to the late 2020s, as a lot of those folks get into their senior citizen years and decide that they don't want to take care of the third of an acre yard anymore. And kids never come home anyway. So residents, so we've seen that, we'll see that more of that turnover going on in the future, but it really isn't happening to a great extent today. And that's a big driver of why enrollment has been fairly steady and not growing to a significant degree. We have seen some new subdivision and housing development. I'll talk a lot about that. Some of those developments, for various reasons, have been slower to launch than we previously expected they would, or to accelerate and pick up the pace after they reach the initial kind of first few houses. Any development has a kind of a bell curve lifespan. The first few pioneers move in, it starts slow, and then there's a critical mass that develops, and it's a bell curve kind of growth. Some have a longer front end than others. What we are also seeing is more affordable single-family options here in Waunakee. We've talked in the past about whether the market here is missing, some young families. It has increasingly over the past few years, as prices have gone up and gone up much faster than incomes. We've had some increased interest in multiple family housing. That's related to the same factor. And like most Dane County communities, there is no sustained housing impact from the pandemic. Showing stopped for a month or two last spring, but after that, the housing market has been stronger than ever. We looked at each of the communities, talked to the municipal planners and administrators, and got some data from them. New housing growth in the village of Waunakee have averaged about 685 homes per year since 2013. That's single-family housing. There was a little dip in the 2018-2019 horizon, not only in Waunakee but other places. That has reversed itself over the last 2 years. And in fact, for the first time in over a decade, the village is on pace for over 100 single-family housing starts here in 2021. 44 permits issued for through the first 3 months of the year alone. Most of those are in new subdivisions that do in fact cater a little bit to that, if not first-time buyer, second-time home buyer that usually has more kids or prospects for kids. Within Westport and Middleton, we've seen some increased activity within the town of Westport. 11 single-family homes permitted in 2019, 34 in 2020, and again, they're on pace to at least have that many here in 2021 as well. Most of them have been in Carriage Ridge, which is building out and will soon have no lots available. But the farm, the prairie component of Bishop's Bay is gaining some momentum after, again, one of those slower starts. Seeing 7 new permits in 2021, and it took a while to get there. In contrast, we're seeing some slowing activity in the Bishop's Bay component of the city of Middleton. As you all know, Bishop's Bay is part of the Waunakee School District, both the Middleton and Westport components. About 19 single-family homes built there per year. A few vacant lots are left. We've had some continued multiple family growth. Very few students for your district are coming out of that multiple family housing. And currently, the city and the developer are in a disagreement on financing for expansion of utilities to a new phase that would include a lot of single-family housing. I don't see immediate resolution to that based on talking to both sides of that, so that is slowing the Middleton component of their development. Why you're not seeing new phases of subdivision activity in Bishop's Bay, at least the Middleton side.
Hey, Mark, I think I remember in the past you saying that these big multi-family projects, they'll bring a lot of students. Is that
Generally
still the
speaking,
case?
yes. It depends, and I'll get into this a little bit later, but not always. More affordable projects that have 2 and 3 bedroom units can generate a number of kids. There's a newer
If you're going to get into it.
newer workforce housing in Middleton that we've got 1 kid for every 2 units, which is very high compared to typical multifamily, which is you need 20 units at least to get a single school kid out of. Looking at the existing market, we still have significant price increases in your district. The median sale price of existing homes in the Waunakee Westport market is $460,000. That's for an existing home. It's almost 50% higher than the county median, and it's $90,000 higher than the second highest market, which is Middleton, your next door neighbor. So what has resulted, as I mentioned earlier, is many young families are priced out of the local housing market here in the Waunakee School District area. We did last project enrollment in 2017. That was based in part on housing unit growth. This is a map of your district that shows where we thought the biggest growth would be, kind of scattered throughout the village of Waunakee and Bishop's Bay at the time. We put this graphic together for this presentation, and it requires a little bit of unpacking to figure out what it's trying to tell us. And so what it's trying to show is our updated single-family development timeline over the next 10 years or so versus when we thought these developments would pop in 2017. So each of the rows here represent a different neighborhood or subdivision that is occurring or is planned to occur within the Waunakee Community School District. This code after each one is the attendance area that neighborhood is located in, Heritage, Prairie, or Arboretum. And the other numbers are our neighborhoods that we've assigned to these things. Probably mean nothing to most people, but to me, I get it. So for these, for the bars represent, if it's green, that neighborhood has grown faster than we thought it was going to grow back in 2017. or is growing faster. And in that category was Westview Meadows and Carriage Ridge, but also Heritage Hills. Heritage Hills in 2017 was not on our radar to develop until around 2030 or so. So that was a surprise for us. And as you'll see in a second, that development is going very quickly. On the other side of the coin, the neighborhoods you see in red are going slower than we anticipated back in 2017. Arboretum Village, the Bishop's Bay Farm and Prairie component. Kilkenny West has not yet opened on the other side of Kew. And Arboretum Village, although it's now popping, has come later than we anticipated back in 2017. And there's a few others that fit in that category that seem to be coming later than we thought. And then the yellow ones are more or less, on track for where we've been. So, basically speaking, compared to our 2017 projections, more are moving slower than moving faster, but as we're seeing some development occur in places like Heritage Hills and Arboretum Village now, the quantity of new neighborhoods is less important than the number of new homes being built in the neighborhoods where they are being built. And so in Heritage Hills, we are seeing significant new development. That development will include almost 500 single-family homes or twin units. That's the modern word for duplexes. And about 200 multiple family units, could be more along and near Highway 19. And that's off to a strong start. By April of 2021, when we had our cutoff date, we had over 20 units permitted already. A new phase is scheduled to be developed, roads put in this year for the next wave. They're taking it relatively conservatively now, smaller phases. But still, we'd expect build out of these 700 units within about 10 to 12 years. And that's typical of Iridian homes and their experience in other places. They also typically have fairly significant student generation with the price points that they hit and amenities they provide in the neighborhoods. Another new development that is I think, attempting to fill the gap with a more affordable single-family price point and condominiums that may be more affordable is Arboretum Village, north of Arboretum Elementary. A little bit smaller in scale, 130 units. Some opportunity for more single-family, as I mentioned, closer to the business park. And infrastructure was installed last fall, and we have new homes being permitted. And like other Tierney developments, we would expect acceleration pretty quickly and build out within about 5 years, at which point the Tierneys do control more land east of Hogan Road to kind of continue the same mode of operation. So there has been some response to this, perceived or real lack of housing, of more affordable housing in the Waunakee market.
You have a feel for what the average home price would be in this subdivision?
It changes daily. So I would hate to give you a number, Jack. I think you can get a home for under 400 here and closer to 300 in Heritage Hills. The other response that we're seeing in the housing market is multiple family housing proposals. The village of Waunakee has recently added some flexibility to its housing mix policy to enable additional multiple family housing to occur. There's basically no vacancy rate for multiple family in the 53597 zip code. There are a handful of multiple family proposals at various stages. As I mentioned earlier, typically hasn't had a lot of student generation. We had some data from the Madison and Maine project you see on the screen. It took about 10 units to get a single student in your schools. But we do have a more affordable project that was built on or is going to be built on the west side of the Waunakee. That could certainly have a different dynamic and more students.
Are these two-bedroom units in
Madison and Maine and most places are predominantly 1 and 2 bedroom units.
Yeah, and that other one's gonna be 2 to
I think
3.
there's some 3s in there.
Yeah, this is all market level pricing though for all of the apartment buildings.
Absolutely, and
Yeah, you're
market
starting-
rate, you know,
This
market.
one, doesn't this one have some workforce housing on? This
I
particular
don't,
project.
I don't know that it does, Jack, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, there was one of them that had some specific entities for, I think, adults with disabilities. I'm not sure exactly to what degree that was set aside, but there was a part of that, but I think the rest of it is, from my understanding, they're starting at $1,100-$1,200. a
Yeah,
month
at the
for
low
smaller
end.
Units, and then they go up from there.
Yeah, that's right. So kind of switching gears from the housing market to demographics and enrollment trends, I want to talk about a couple stats that are key, and I think you've probably read about a lot of this in the media. And Dane County's not immune to it. The birth trend in the county, number of births went up from the year 2000 to the year 2015, and has took a big tumble after that. The latest data I have is 2018. The decrease, as I've looked at communities like the Waunakee district and others, seems to be focused near the center of the county, city of Madison in particular. As we look at the Waunakee birth trend in your school district, it's been very steady, almost hovering right around 180 new births every year for the past 20 years. And that's reflected in your enrollment, which has been fairly steady, new number of kindergartners that have come in over that period of time. You know, at the same time, we have more and more housing units being built in Waunakee, right? 85 new single-family homes per year in the village. So that says that, on average, each home is generating fewer kids than it used to. So that comports with, you know, just a lower birth rate, even if the number of births is still high. And so we're seeing that's a national trend. It's playing out even in, you know, suburban areas like Waunakee. We also know that last year, nationwide, there were about 8% fewer pregnancies than there were in 2019, pandemic related, and also related to this continued kind of decline in number of births. A lot of theories to what's going to happen with that. I think one of my next slides talks a little bit more about that, so I'm sort of giving away my story here. This chart requires a little bit of lead-in too. This is the age distribution. In this case, this is the village of Waunakee. This is where we've got the data. The rows represent the age groups from under 5 to 84 plus, and the dashed lines represent how many of those folks there were in the village of Waunakee in 2010, and the purple bars represent how many were in the village in 2019. So you see a fairly significant difference. Again, the kids in school relatively similar, although you see a lot of more kids in the high school age, and that comports with your kind of enrollment numbers at the high school. As we move up the chain, kind of an interesting bump in 20 to 24-year-olds could be a factor of some of the apartments being built in the area recently. It's hard to tell exactly. But if you look at the folks that are otherwise in their primary childbearing years from about 25 to low 40s, we don't have many more, probably fewer people in that age group today than we did back in 2010. Instead, we have a lot of these folks, and I know some of them are in the room here, that came in around the year 2000 and have stuck around. And that's the folks within this 45 to 60 age group that's ballooning here in Waunakee. And then you see the older ages are all higher. That's endemic of the society, baby boomers in general. So you have this giant group here of folks that are around 50, 55 years old within the community. In many cases have kids that are out of school, or senior and a sophomore, or whatever it may be in school that are kind of changing your district. This baby did not give permission to be in the photo. I know that for a fact. It's mine. The birth numbers, where will they go? We do have the largest generation, the millennials. They're in their prime childbearing years right now. So we would think that they might, have a lot of kids. But millennials are getting married at lower rates than the previous generations. They're having fewer children. They're having children later. There's a lot of reasons for that. A lot of speculation looking to the future, the effects of the pandemic, social unrest, climate concerns, you name it. That impact on number of births is not a positive impact. People are uneasy and uncertain about the future. That doesn't usually lead to having a lot of babies. And then here's this statistic, 8% lower. So that's going to affect everyone. It's going to affect at least one of your class sizes starting in 2026. I don't know if you guys are going to be 8% lower or not. We'll see when we get the birth numbers.
So Mark,
for
are
next
you
year.
moving into the district? We need more students.
I'm going to stay put, but I'm one of those people that it's hard to move because they're satisfied where they are.
That's correct.
Yeah. And, we're fortunate in the county to have so many good districts. We've shared this statistic and updated over the years. This chart shows with the red the number of 12th graders in a given year and the number of kindergartners in a given year. So you see those lines separating from each other, where we have a lot of graduating seniors and not enough kindergartners who sort of take their place. Yeah, we do have that growth, that 5 to 10 increase over the years that does get it up over the lifespan. But there is a gap as we look at the replacement of students.
And that 256 number, that was the year we dipped a couple of years ago, and we have bounced back. We're back in that trend of like the 270. But it's been a pretty steady line from up 270 is what we've had in kindergarten starting off.
So the net effect on this, these are bars that represent K4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, 12 enrollment, is that we've had growth in the 9, 12 as all those folks that came in the late 90s and 2010s and their kids have kind of moved their way through the system, but relatively flat enrollment in each of the other grade groups over the last, in this case, 5 years. I have a point here, the flat or steady elementary school enrollment in the past 5 years means that current intermediate school bubble, which you're going to hear about later tonight, may not last, and most families in new homes typically don't bring in new intermediate, middle, or high school students. They typically bring in younger students or preschool students or none yet. Each year we do this, I have this kind of nervous moment where we share how we did in our projections, which is not usually a lot of fun for me, but in any case, the projected resident student enrollment, this chart shows what we thought was going to happen. We thought that there was going to be fairly significant growth in the elementary school level, about 200 new kids. This is resident student enrollment, as Randy mentioned earlier, and we'll see that hasn't quite happened. Just like housing, we projected where we thought those students would come. That helps us predict which schools, particularly at the elementary school level, we'd expect kids to be. And this chart requires a little explanation too. This is actual grade K-4 resident enrollment, again, resident, versus our projections, the last two we've made in 2012 and 2017. So the blue line represents the actual enrollment in the given year, 2015, 2018, 2019, and 2020. The orange line represents the projections we made back in 2012, and the gray line represents the projection we made in 2017. So I've circled this last one. This is K4 again. As I've showed you earlier, we thought in 2017 there'd be 1,500 resident enrollees. There were only 1,300, 200 less than we predicted. So why did that happen? And I start by saying, to be fair to me, actual 2020 K-4 enrollment was negatively affected by the pandemic. There were 68 fewer grade K and 1 students in the district in September 20 compared to 2019. So there was a real effect. But there's more than just the pandemic at play. An unexpected and likely decline in the local birth rate was a key factor. Recent housing, perhaps not attracting as many families with kids at home, probably a factor. We had a couple of developments that just started slower or didn't go as quickly as we thought in Arboretum Village and Kilkenny West. It's not that Don and Jerry Tierney are not busy, they've just become a regional developer. They're not just a Waunakee developer anymore, and they've got other projects in other locations. And Bishop's Bay was slower than expected, which has been a pattern over the years. So we did look at actual grade resident enrollment numbers versus our projections for each of the 3 elementary schools. Arboretum difference is due, that you see in this chart, is due almost entirely to forced transfers. This is cases where there's just not enough room in Arboretum, so they go to a different school, they get assigned to a different school than Arboretum. So that's a factor, and then slower than expected start at Arboretum Village. We thought that there'd be homes and kids in those homes. In 2020, there obviously were not. Heritage, we over-projected Heritage. That difference was due to the pace at Bishop's Bay. Kilkenny West not getting off the ground as we had thought it would be by 2020. And Bishop's Bay, even the single-family houses generate fewer school kids, significantly fewer school kids than Village of Waunakee single-family subdivisions. But we do see that younger Heritage classes are larger than the older classes, so you should expect some bounce and increase in Heritage over the next few years. And I don't have to explain myself on Prairie, thank heavens. Short story on grade 5 through 6 resident enrollment versus projections is we've done a pretty good job, and we should have probably just quit in 2012 because we were only 2 off from actual at the intermediate school level then, but still pretty close to our 2017 projection. Grade 6, 7, 8, resident enrollment projections versus enrollment versus our projections. We over-projected the number of middle school students. This is residents. You're going to see different numbers here later in the meeting. But we projected back in 2017, we thought we'd have 650 some middle schoolers. In the resident enrollment, it was 580. What happened there? First off, we think it's a temporary thing. You're going to hear more about that in the near future. We've got a bubble of students in I think the 4th, 5th, and 6th grades that are going to become middle schoolers very soon. That's going to bounce. I think you're going to hear that the bounce is probably going to be bigger than this, especially when we add open enrollees. But we think we're going to be at least at 650 and probably more over the next few years. But given that we've had these smaller class sizes, kindergartners, 1st graders, 2nd graders, 3rd graders, I don't expect that number to be radically increasing over the early part of the 2020s, 2022 to 2026-ish. We do have some upward pressure from new housing development in family-friendly configurations. Again, I don't know how many middle school kids that's going to bring, like on day 1, you move in with a 7th grader. We will have, at the end of the 2020s, turnover of those houses that were built in the 2000 period. If you think about folks moving in when they're 30 years old, raising their family, and then they're about 60 years old towards the end of the 2020s, thinking about other options. So that could be a factor, and you could be a beneficiary of open enrollment and more relocations from other districts as well. So that's the grade 7 and 8 outlook. I think in short, you're going to see definitely a bubble over the next couple of years and growth at the middle school level. But I suspect that'll that'll flatten out for a while before accelerating again in the late 2020s. 9th, 12, we did a pretty good job. The actual resident enrollment was 1312 and our projection was 1341. Some takeaways: our households are having fewer babies here and everywhere. That'll affect this district and countless others. Housing market, though, is strong, and it's diversifying in a way that should attract more families, particularly at the lower grade groups. So there's kind of countervailing influences there. And then this turnover wave that I have talked about a couple times now. Final points: neither Heritage nor the middle school met our 2020-2021 enrollment projections for those schools, but most other projections are on track. You know, unfortunately, those are the two schools that you're really zeroing in on, so I apologize for that. But enrollment ought to grow at these and other schools during the 2020s, probably less than projected in 2017 due to a host of factors that I've covered here today. But we really think before doing another set of projections, it makes sense to get the September 2021 numbers in so that we can get back to a quote-unquote more normal year, try to understand that a little bit better than we would have if we leaned on numbers from this year. So with that, I'll conclude my presentation. I always go longer than I expect, and I apologize for that, but if you have any questions, feel free to let me know.
Thank you, Mark. Go ahead.
So when we're talking about the middle school in particular, you think it's a little bit low right now. There's going to be a bubble that's going to put it back around 650 within about 3 years.
Yeah, it could be next year.
And then it'll be fairly flat for several years, but by the end of the 2020s, you're expecting it to start accelerating.
Yeah, I am, because we're seeing more single-family housing growth now in Waunakee. Again, we're going to be almost certainly over 100 units this year, which for the first time in a long time. And I'm convinced that starting in the late 2020s, the homes that were built in around the year 2000 are going to start to flip to new owners, and many of those folks will have kids.
Yeah, in a few minutes, Dave, once Mark's done, we'll talk about some of our things with the middle school next year. And you'll see that those numbers are already over 650 for next year, and then there's kind of that bubble class moving through. One of the pieces I just wanted to add in is as we look at enrollment at the elementaries, Prairie's still our largest elementary. It'll have next year over 600 kids starting the year. Heritage will be just a tick under 600, and Arboretum will be in the low 500s. So that's kind of how those size pieces are shaking out. All right. Any specific questions for Mark on what he presented this evening?
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So as you take a look at these last two slide decks that we've gone through, obviously catching us up on where we left off, and then updating us on what's really thank you, Mark, what's happening around our community right now from a growth perspective. I mean, one of the questions that we are going to need to have some direction on is kind of those timeline pieces. Again, I don't necessarily need that here this evening, but I think that would be a piece that I want to make sure that we can potentially have some dialogue on next Monday to kind of get a sense of kind of what are some of the things that you would like to see us focusing on over the course of the next few months. As Mark said, the enrollment piece, which is a key variable in all of our planning, is we do feel we need to, and I would agree with that, get a sense of where we are in September. But are there other pieces that we can help provide that would give you any information that you're feeling you're lacking right now? Obviously, there's a lot of information we presented this evening, but in relation to this, is there something you'd like to see that might help you at least with our discussion in the short term, even as soon as next Monday?
I would say there's always two things you're looking at. I mean, we know projected class sizes, you can pretty well figure what the next 3 to 4 years are.
Yeah.
I mean, that's always just move them up, add the 17, and there's your next class size.
Right.
The question then becomes is what is the capacity of our buildings?
Right.
And when I was looking back at the 2014 referendum, we were calling the middle school at basically 690 if every class was at its absolute maximum capacity.
Right.
And if we throw out the temporary building behind our building, you lose, I think it's about another 45.
Something like that. Yeah, the number I had for the middle school, and this was from the presentation after that one, I had 672 was our max functional capacity at the middle school.
And that was including the temporary
And that one I
classroom
wasn't,
with
that is a piece I'd have to go back and take a look at.
Right, yeah, because that would match, this is what, the presentation I'm looking at was before the referendum.
Right.
So by the time you were doing that one, we had already decided to move the temporary classroom.
Right.
So that's why yours is higher than the one I'm looking at. So we're looking at 630, and currently the middle school's already at 616. I would really like, though, when we're sitting there talking about the middle school, because that's probably going to be half of our focus, the other half is going to be heritage. When we look at the middle school, though, I'd really love to see the numbers from what it was originally designed for. Because after volunteering for lunch there, seeing that we're having to run is that the only building we run 3 lunch periods at? I think?
I think so, yeah.
Right, we're having to run
That's
3
what it
lunch
is.
periods because there physically isn't enough room for the kids to have lunch. I mean, while we talk about classroom space, that's an important number, but we've literally out-capacitated everything else about the building getting to that number. So I'd love to see what the original design said it was good for.
Yeah, and I believe when we looked at that last time, it was around 600,
Yeah.
but it was configured, it's obviously it's used much differently than it is now than it was in 1992, I think, when it was built.
But there also was a add-on to the south end of the school.
That's true.
Yeah, so
So
we
it's
should,
not
they
the
have to
original
build.
building anymore either.
right, we should consider that, but,
So we need the number with both of those. What was the capacity with the original plus the addition that went on?
I
right.
think I have that. I actually think we found the referendum packets from back when we did the building and when we did the addition, so we can pull that out.
That'd be helpful.
I think we should look at both, though, because I remember when we were looking at the referendum for the intermediate school, we designed the common areas ready for the 800. We didn't design it for putting only the 700 we're sitting at right now, because we knew if we ever expand the building, your cafeteria has to expand, but when you do a classroom expansion, you don't go back and add 15 feet onto your cafeteria and 20 feet onto your gym. So we did that ahead of time. I happened to be lucky enough to be working for the contractor when we built the middle school. I know that wasn't part of it. So it's kind of a 2-part thing we have to look at. The other number that always becomes important, I know when we were doing the last referendum, it wasn't just about that referendum. It was looking 5 years into the future saying, probably the middle school is next, and then probably 5 years after that we could do an elementary school. That's why we did heritage the way we did it. And the whole idea was to keep the tax rate flat, that we wouldn't have a huge spike by having too many buildings fall on top of each other at the same time. So I'll be interested in seeing Steve's numbers again, saying where are the break points where we can do a referendum of how much money without raising the tax rate. And I think that helps us make decisions on what we prioritize to make sure we don't cause a huge spike. I mean, it worked great with the intermediate school. There was basically no tax increase and we got a brand new intermediate school. It's now been 7 years. We should be able to see a point where how much can we build and not cause that effect.
Yeah. Steve, can I put you on the spot for a second and just kind of get your point of view on what Dave's asking for is what's that break point where you, as you add referendum dollars in, it doesn't have an impact on our tax rate. What's the timeline as far as how to gather that information? I know that's a piece you normally do with PMA and with Not sure if you're muted or if we just can't hear you, Steve. Still can't hear. Is there another thing getting knocked off over here? Let's try it now, Steve.
Okay, can you hear me now?
There we go. Thank you.
Okay. So yes, Dave, we will work with PMA. The good news is every year that we go without adding adding a capital referendum, another year of zero on our debt service schedule opens up for us. So as an example, every year that we have on our debt service schedule that is currently listed at zero, we can then layer debt out 20 years, which gives us the opportunity to have a higher dollar amount without impacting the tax rate in the short run. In the budget planning document, which the budget committee will be looking at again tomorrow night and the full board will be looking at next Monday night, I can be sure to point out the debt service schedule for the district so the board members can see how many years we have available to have debt that currently are sitting at zero. And what we would do is work with PMA to, again, achieve the board's goal of consistency over time with the tax rate and to maximize our ability to borrow over 20 years. So we can definitely begin to have those conversations with PMA, but the fact that we're now a year away from when these conversations, last stopped, will open up a whole nother year for us on the debt service schedule. That'll have another zero on it.
So I think what you were asking for, Dave, was kind of that conceptual model that shows what's the dollar amount that allows you to stay at zero. Was that really what you were asking, or was I misinterpreting what your question was?
Yeah, you presented it last time, Steve, which was basically, you gave us what was the zero number, and then you looked at each of the proposals and said that number would result in X amount.
Right. So you're looking at what's the value of the zero?
What's the value of the zero right now? I mean, I think that's a kind of a start point.
Right. Does that make sense,
Yep,
Steve?
we can definitely do that, Dave.
All right, awesome. Okay. Any other questions or pieces that you'd have? Questions either for me, for Steve, or for our team that presented? Awesome. All right, thank you. Going, Joan, or are there any questions that you have? Yeah, the next item we have on our agenda is related, but it's definitely got a short-term impact that we felt we needed to bring in front today. So Jeff, I'm going to ask you to come forward and just have a seat at the table up here as we kind of walk through it. Tim, if you want to join them, I know you did some work on the enrollment projections. In your packet, you'll find a memo that Jeff sent to me and to us with regards to just some concerns he has as we're starting to plan for middle school enrollment for next year. A couple things that we did know is we obviously knew that we had some larger classes that were coming up from, as Mark even pointed out, our current year we're in, 4th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade, and now they'll start moving into the middle school. Some of the pieces we've been watching is how are we going to address those as they come forward. Question we had just a few months ago was, as we started to talk about like virtual learning, how many kids are opting into continued virtual learning options. That number is coming in quite low. I think we're under 10 at the middle school as far as families that are seeking that type of an option for them. So it's not having an enrollment impact on us as far as a space issue. And I think, Jeff, the way the conversation, I'm trying to summarize here just real quickly for the board, the concerns that you brought forward to me are with regards to some of the students moving forward, some of their special needs, how we can best meet those. And if you recall from our tour of the middle school, their spaces are much smaller, particularly for meeting our children with disabilities, and needing to make sure we have adequate space to address those needs. Second of all is then just options as we've moved two instructors from the intermediate school to the middle school, and then to accommodate and travel with this larger class, and then how to accommodate those faculty while they're doing their instructional piece. So the memo that's in your packet really has outlined a little bit about enrollment that Tim put together to give you a projection. You're already looking at the 657 kids projected for this next school year. And then that goes up to 692 and 679 over the next couple of years respectively. The other piece that we took a look at was what are our options? Our options are to, one, utilize our staff and put them on really kind of mobile carts where you utilize your space in a different way. If you're a teacher of, let's just pick one of the areas that could move, like health, you would move where the kids are as opposed to kids coming to a classroom. A second option, which we've talked around this table up when we start looking at the high school and middle school, can we share any space with the high school? I think some of the challenges is one, finding the space, and then two, the traveling across. And then the third option is looking at an additional portable unit, just like we have behind the current middle school, adding another one right next to it, which there is actually space for that to be located, which would give us some additional space to accomplish this bubble, give us some time to kind of do our planning around where our future holds, and give us flexibility with servicing our students. John has put together, and I've asked him to start looking at where we could access a portable unit. They're a little bit more challenging to come by post-COVID, right in this kind of time frame. The supply chain of those is a little tougher. There are some newer units that we could find. Installation at that point doesn't come until probably once we'd already have school started. And John does have his eye on a piece that that is in Illinois that we could tie into, and there's like, I believe, that would be an item we could lease, and it would be like a 2-year lease. I'm sure we could go longer if we needed it. And it was about $85,000 for the total of the 2 years. So those are just some of the kind of the options and the pieces. Tim went through and did the enrollment projections that you see in front of you. So I guess that's kind of the preamble. I'd just like to open it up for some discussion, and Jeff, I kind of took away a lot of your pieces there, but from your lens as a principal there, is there anything that I missed or the things that you'd like to articulate?
No, I think you covered quite a bit of it. Really, we do have an area in our school right now that is serving our students with special needs. However, we have a changing clientele of students coming in, which, to have students in larger groups is affected by that. There are some more students who need more individual needs, more privacy. And so that piece of it adds a little bit of a more of a crimp into our space needs, which would have otherwise just been there. And then, this increasing group of people makes it very challenging with the space we have now, because we've already turned all of our computer labs into classrooms. We've turned a couple of old storage areas into office/intervention rooms and stuff. So we've kind of maximized some of the non-original classroom space and made it into some student areas. But we're running out of some of the options, at least with the kind of students we're looking at dealing with, and trying to also meet the needs of our special needs kids as well.
Okay.
Go ahead, Mark.
So, I'm very aware, I think we all are, of the modifications you've made out of micro spaces and computer labs and things like that, and yet here we are, and it looks to me that you could have 50 more students in your school this year, and then another addition the next year. And I guess my question to you is, one, relocatable enough? If that were the direction we go in, you're going to have room for 2 more teachers. 50 kids isn't just 2 more classes; it's a bunch of classes that you're taking. And so, what I'd hate to do is we give you X, and you're grateful for it, but then mid next year we're hearing you have no space. And I know this is a temporary solution, but would 2 serve you better than 1 without being extravagant in doing that?
Let me ask a clarifying question before Jeff answers that. John, the unit you were looking at, was that a 2-classroom unit or a 1-classroom unit? That was a 2-classroom unit. So were you asking if there was 2 classrooms or 4 classrooms?
Yeah, is the need greater for just 1 2-room relocatable?
Okay. And I think it's also probably an issue of space back there as far as how it would align itself out there. So you can go ahead and answer that, Jeff. I mean, I guess you and I haven't talked about that.
No, we haven't talked about that.
That's all right.
I think there's a point at which, yeah, sure, 2 would probably give us a lot more flexibility. There are pros and cons to the relocatable, as you saw in the memo. I mean, it's not the perfect solution, nor is anything else we have. I think at some point we're going to have to navigate how teachers share spaces and how we try to utilize their spaces a little bit differently. I think there's some flexibility to that too, as you saw in the memo, but this comes with pros and cons as well. So, I mean, yes, to answer your question, I mean, 2 would probably, if you're looking past next year and into really probably that year after, 2 years out is really when that really big, I think, bubble hits us, and then we could probably drop back down a little bit more to where we'll be next year, even a little bit less than that for a while. So the question is do you put in 2 more portables because you know that 1 year is going to really be tough, or do you find a way to use 1 portable and then navigate the really tough years? You know it's a short-term solution.
Right.
And I would say to you, off the cuff without running a schedule, I think we could, with 1 more relocatable, make, if that's what we had, that was a decision we decided to make, that really big bubble, we find a way to go tight for a year, if that's what you have to navigate. If it was going to be a long term where you're going to see 690, 700 kids for another 3 or 4 years, maybe that's a better discussion, but to try to make do and have some people travel for a year potentially might be the better overall solution. But I mean, we can get creative. It taxes our teaching staff, which makes it challenging.
Do you have staff in carts now?
We do not, I believe. And I think the biggest trouble with the cart issue is, in my previous experience, having people on carts isn't as problematic if you have a general space for people to go and work and collaborate. But we don't have that either right now, which makes it more challenging.
I was a cart guy for a lot of years, so it's not easy.
I've done it once or twice myself.
So Randy, I thought when we took the January count or the September count, you know, our class sizes going into middle school were below 300.
Not going into middle school.
They've never been.
The elementary school numbers are under 300. So you start looking, once you get past that, when you get lower than that 4th, 5th, and 6th grade right now, those are smaller class sizes. And that's what Mark was alluding to, was we have that bubble coming through the middle school. It's coming through the intermediate school right now. It'll find its way to the middle school starting next year, and then it's going to start coming down. Unless we have growth, then it starts to come at the middle school, which isn't necessarily where we've traditionally seen growth happen.
Right.
So the lower class sizes are at that beginning elementary. We have large class sizes, 4th, 5th, and 6th grade right now.
So we've got basically 2 years there with the large
Yeah,
class
you
size.
basically have 3 years. If you take a look at the memo, 21, 22, all the way through 24. So right now, we're at 616 kids. Next year, we're projecting 657. And then after that, it's 692, and then it drops down to 679. So you have really 3 years of kind of these bigger groups coming in before you start to find your way back down to anywhere close to where we are now.
But even then, which is why I was pushing Mark about that question, and
Right.
he's even seeing after the 679, we go down to 650, which is still 30 more than we have in the school now. And we're saying we're already maxed out.
Yeah,
That's why, the problem with looking at the kindergarten.
We're maxed out because, or if you put people on carts, does that help the situation or hurt the situation?
Helping it from a standpoint of like utilizing the space. Like
Utilizing the space.
Yes, if you can navigate the others to come along with that, correct.
But Jack, we're doing the same thing we did before, which was what we looked back at 2014 and when we did that referendum. We knew this was coming. It was going to keep slowly getting bigger. We know that. We're maxed out at 616, and now we're saying, well, how can we stay at 650 for as long as possible? It's like that's still not a solution long term.
If I may, I mean, to two things to add in here. The first is, as Jeff has said, putting somebody on a cart and kind of, having hot swaps of rooms helps you stretch the instructional space further. Not all of our schools are created equally, or at least where we are at today, sitting equally in terms of the ability to find some place. If somebody comes into your classroom to teach, where do you go for your planning period? And some of our schools have planning areas where teachers can go to, but the middle school doesn't right now, particularly as we've kind of moved into some of the smaller spaces. So that's where part of the rub comes in. And Dave, to your point, I mean, for this, all we did here on the enrollment was we looked at based on enrollments that Julie, our registrar, has with existing students and families coming in. These are the students we expect in the fall next year, and then we just took the next fall's 5th and 6th grade students, moved them up, and added the typical bump we see between 6th and 7th grade. That's not really, we're not Mark, So we're not trying to take it, take it out any further beyond that, just because that kind of methodology is good for short-term forecasting. It's not good for longer-term forecasting.
I think the other piece that's come up here is I think initially, when I initially spoke with Jeff and Mike at the middle school about when we added 2 teachers, when the question we asked was, is that going to work within the space? And I think initially your response was, I think so, we'll kind of make it work and take a look at it. And I think after they went through that process and then particularly looked at, as we should, at kind of the students coming in, there were some concerns that came up just with kind of how that was going to work and specific spaces that I think was kind of in your mind that you could give up and utilize differently that weren't going to work with kind of the clientele that we were working with. So that's kind of what precipitated our kind of new direction in conversation. And when you kind of lay this out then over a 3-year period, you do have to have some sort of a solution to kind of a deal with that growth. So it's kind of a matter of bringing that forward now versus later.
Mark?
Something I think we need to consider with wherever we go is the prism of equity. And I don't think anyone here could say that teacher X on a cart is going to be teaching as effectively as they would in their own room.
Why?
Why? Because they can't take all the materials, Jack.
You can't prep, you can't
You have no
prepare.
place to prep. You can take enough materials. Because kids aren't even in a room that was designed for them. It was designed for other classes. And then you got this time period between going from classroom A on the north end to maybe classroom C on the south end.
And to set up for a class, if you want something, to be started before the kids come in, a warm-up activity, you don't have any time to do that. I mean, you rush in.
You bringing all your materials with you?
You start
every
class
day?
5
Are there
minutes
certain
late.
subjects that may be different? Some subjects might be able to do that?
Okay, I did it for at least 8 years as an English teacher. And what that meant on my cart, I had to have whatever stacks run off on my cart for that section. And then I had to go get the same runoffs for a different class because you can only put so much on the cart. And so what you either do less handouts and less of that kind of thing, or you are really going crazy trying to make sure you have all your supplies with you. And today's teaching is different than it was then too. You're looking at incremental periods of use of time where there's much less direct instruction. And so to meet those needs of the individuals to transition from activity A, B, and C, the number of materials you need are exponentially more. So I think it's an equity issue for teaching, which results in instruction, and then the people who receive that are the students. And so I think as a prism, at least we need to consider, I'm not saying no carts, but I am saying additional space would provide greater equity of instruction and learning than relying strictly on carts.
And I think I heard, what I heard you say, Jeff, was, and it was kind of to Mark's point about 2 classrooms or 4 classrooms, 1 or 2 portables, is when you get that large class coming through that you can operate tightly, What that means is you're gonna have people on carts, you're gonna have people moving around.
Correct.
I think part of the piece is looking at this as kind of a 3-year piece to have
Yes.
people on carts, is we don't have a place. I mean, when you did that at the high school, you also had
More
an English
space.
office.
Right.
And there aren't those spaces, that's what Dave was talking about, what spaces are gone? The team planning rooms are gone at the middle school, they're all intervention rooms. So you don't have the spaces where if a teacher's not in a classroom, that there's another location to be. I mean, it's just, and that's one of the shortcomings of the building and its operational piece right now. So that's part of what creates the challenge that we have in front of us.
So why don't we talk about tearing that middle school down and rebuilding?
That's part of our plan, but
That's-
that's not
Tearing the
gonna
middle
help
school
this
down.
year.
If we do that, you're talking 5 years down the road. That doesn't solve anything over the next 3 years. It takes 5 years by the time we get a referendum through, and get it done, and get it built. That's why I was trying to push this 2 years ago, and you said we should delay it. We got another 5 years from whatever day we actually get this started. It's not gonna solve this problem, and instead, we're gonna spend $150,000 to $200,000 on 2 portables over the next 4 years to try and solve a problem that we should have started on 2 years ago.
How can you utilize some of the space in the high school? Have you looked at that?
We had some of the conversations.
I did.
And what are you doing there? What can we do?
Well, the high school is using a lot of their space there, so we could potentially, if there's a classroom here or a classroom there, we'd be bouncing into a classroom, but then you would have your 7th and or 8th graders, depending upon where in the high school they needed to get to, they're traveling from the middle school to some part of the high school to get to a classroom, which is going to have a significant impact on instructional time. There is a near kind of work area where teachers are utilizing for collaboration space right now. You could theoretically turn that into classrooms, but now you're displacing probably 70 teachers out of their work area and collaboration area, and now you're having a significant impact on high school. And that, I would advocate for that by any stretch of imagination.
Where is this teacher collaboration space? Is that
It's
the
the
space
area
that we
upstairs, Jack.
upstairs? And people are actually utilizing that space?
Some of them are, I mean, when we went up there just this last week, there was a few teachers that are using it. Is it being utilized fully like it was designed? No. It's a storage area. It's kind of taken the space of what was used to be the team planning rooms, so the department planning rooms. And it's become a few areas. I mean, there's I'm not sure how many teachers are up there, but there were some of the workstations being used, but it's also the storage space for it. I mean, and when you move classrooms like middle school into there, because that was an option we've talked about, is you've now got to find where you putting the rest of the stuff that gets utilized by departments throughout the year. I mean, it's a domino piece that we're running into.
And there are construction costs that we would incur to make retrofit it for the middle school.
And that was
students.
kind of part of what was on here, to utilize that differently. I mean, I think part of what's bringing this in front of us, it certainly wasn't, I mean, this isn't the timeline I like bringing this type of a discussion to the board, because we're sitting here in June. This is a conversation that would have been ideal to bring a few months ago. There's a few variables that have shifted. One is trying to get a sense of the enrollment. 2, getting a sense of kind of where does that virtual piece go, because we really were wondering, is that going to help, is that going to reduce some of our burden and going to make it easier to move in? And 3 is kind of the assessment of just some of the functional needs to service the children that we have in the building. And as we've kind of looked at all of those things, it's brought us to really need to bring this in front of us to have that discussion. I mean, if there's additional information that we need, what we need for direction is what's can be supported from the board for us to move forward with our planning. I don't necessarily need an answer tonight, but I'm going to need it by next Monday, so that we can get moving with which direction we're going to get rolling with.
I don't see a choice. You're buying an additional classroom. You're putting another building out behind it. We're going to start having classes in parking lots. And that's what we're going to be doing, and you're talking multiple years of it. And that is horrible. And I was one of the ones who said move the additional classroom to behind the middle school to extend us so we could get to the next referendum without a huge tax increase, and now it's biting us because we came to rely on it. We're not even pretending anymore. We're sitting there saying, put teachers on carts and keep the additional classroom back there. We were supposed to get rid of this in 5 years. Now we're gonna double it up. That's terrible. I don't know how many of you have been in the middle school during a school day when the students are there. It's horrible. You can't walk through the classroom. I'd love to see the 5 teachers trying to get through that hallway on the second floor with carts. You better double your travel time because there's too many students in the hallway to get there.
So what I'm saying, Dave,
But
you know, obviously.
we need to do the
We
classroom.
need some space. We should really look at, how do we, you know, all I hear is the hallways are too narrow and the building isn't designed properly, all that kind of stuff. We build a new middle school, we're gonna have a 600 student building that sits idle. And there's been no good planning on what is gonna be done with that building. So what we probably should do is tear the damn thing down and build on that site for the middle school.
That's for another night, right?
Yeah.
That's 5 years.
Well, we're gonna be sitting around these tables for the next 4 months talking
We
about
are.
this. Let's make a decision, what direction are we gonna go, and get it done.
But I think that's Monday night. I think right now we need to address, we've got next year to address. And I think we need to, you know, respectfully look at the options that have been presented and give some direction so we can get going with next year.
Can I ask one quick question? When I'm seeing 40 to 60 extra students, how are you handling gym class? I mean, an extra classroom isn't going to do anything towards the fact you almost have to create 2 extra gym classes when the thing's already packed. But
So up to this point, we've been able to navigate not having our FIAD classes meet during our lunch periods to allow for kids to have some indoor spaces and stuff when we have bad weather and things like that. We're going to have to start having all of our PE classes meeting during our lunch periods, which is going to really require that students in an incredibly small cafe no longer can use the gym to eat. And now there will be 200 plus kids in that little cafe, even on inclement weather days, and they'll be sitting there and we will not have places for them to move around, which is just part of the nature of our building. But that's how we're going to handle FIAD classes, because at some point you can't just keep adding more kids to a FIAD class.
Can I make a motion?
Sure.
I'd like to move that we go ahead and purchase for sure 1 relocatable, which is a 2-classroom relocatable, and allow
Purchase or rent.
Or lease.
because-
Rent.
Because it's possible
Possible
we
to
can't
rent.
purchase.
If we can rent, whichever is the most feasible. And then we leave it to the discretion of our administration if they need a second 2-room relocatable. The amount is certainly within amount we've approved in the past for some of these kind of discretionary decisions. I'm not sure you're really ready to say that's exactly what you need this year, maybe something next year you need. And so I would like to leave that on the table for the administration to decide, but we would support whatever they decide.
Second.
Any other discussion?
You said you needed 1, right?
I said, as one of the options I presented is that's one thing we could do is get 1 for next year, and that would definitely work for next year. And I think we could probably, even with 1, even under that really high year, we probably could make some sacrifices and get through that big bubble year. But I'm just,
2 would help.
I don't want to be inefficient. I can't say that.
Our ask was for 1.
That's correct,
what
and that's what I would support. And if you need another one, come back next year.
I mean, I think the other thing, this is probably more John's area than our area. I mean, we've walked the premises, we've got some ideas about where an additional modular could go. I don't know that we've had the discussion about where a 3rd modular would go on the current site.
That's why I would like to leave it to the administration to make that decision.
So the motion's for 1?
Motions for 1 with an option for 2 if the administration feels the need is there for this year.
Okay, any other concerns, discussion?
Well, you got a
All-
motion and a second, you got to vote on that.
Yeah,
Well, just
Yeah,
discussion
there's
about
also
it.
discussion if you want.
if there was any other discussion.
Well, my discussion is, next year, we get them one this year, come back next year for a second one.
So do you want
to
to
show you
amend
where
it?
it's at first? This is kind of get, while you're in discussion mode, this is the middle school. This is the current portable. The place that we've scoped out is right next to it. This one would use most likely this door, this one would most likely use this door. That's what you were thinking, is that correct? Jeff?
Correct.
And that's why we felt the one fit really well right here. This is a flat area. We have electrical already brought out. We're probably not going to bring water out to it. It would just be the electrical piece. And it would be setting it and then creating the space for it to then, I think it would fit well within that space to be able to then navigate students in and out to that door. So that was kind of the concept that we walked a week or so ago.
So from my standpoint, I'd amend that to buy one, or bring one in this year. And, if you need another one next year, come back.
So you're making an
discuss it.
amendment
I'm making an
to
amendment,
make
if I can do
Mark's
that.
motion one only. Is there a second to Jack's amendment?
I'll second that.
Okay, so any other discussion on the amendment? We'll vote on the amendment first.
Is this the time to ask why you're saying let the administration decide as opposed to giving them parameters? Is that the time to ask this question?
Sure. A lot of times our staff come to us with a minimal ask when there's really a maximum need. And I'd like to give them the flexibility to rethink this, both in terms of need and location, and make a decision that's going to best serve our students.
Have that ability up front. Thank you.
I guess from my perspective, just to add clarity to that, because I don't want to see like it's kind of just carte blanche of what
Sure.
we're looking to do. I mean, what we're looking at is really a 2-classroom unit that would go in the location that we showed. The other pieces that we have to then, that have some cost associated with it, are potentially just getting it set so that it's solid and it's in a good foundation, and that it's safe and going to be there and can sustain through our weather issues, and then make sure the electrical's there. So those are the pieces that, from the minimum aspects, that we would then make sure that we have in place. So the number I quoted you was kind of with bringing it in and locating it, but there's some additional costs on top of that, of which we would work through at the lowest possible numbers that we're able to. And once we have that, we can certainly bring that through, but I would want to kind of expedite the ability for us to move that forward so that we can get things in place.
I would also add that you possibly look at where another one may go. It's the obvious, but I just wanted to make that,
Absolutely.
just in case you do something.
So it won't be such a long time to get a second one in there if we needed it.
Okay, so are we ready to vote on the amendment, which is that they bring in and cost out one at this point? All in favor of that, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
May-
So just Mark. And then we're going back to the original,
With amendment.
motion that says it's left up to the administration.
One unit.
No, but only one unit purchase.
The one, yeah, the amendment was for the one unit.
Correct.
And then let us work through the logistics of it administratively.
Right, but
And
now
then
we're
come
back.
next year if you need another.
Correct.
So that amendment passed.
Yep.
That
Correct.
amendment passed.
That's the amendment.
But we are voting on Mark's motion, seconded by David, leaving it up to the administration at this point, buying one, but possibly if they see the need for two, to buy two.
So we vote again.
No,
that's the
the
opposite.
amendment changed that.
The amendment changed that.
The amendment said only one this year.
So,
And they'll look at.
And then they
at the
will
future,
come back.
But that would be a future purchase some other time.
Okay,
So if we vote positive for the,
we're done.
we're done.
If you vote yes, you're basically saying that we're able to move forward with a 2-classroom portable. We'll work through the logistics of setting it up. If we need another one, we come back next year. That's, I think, what you.
That's correct. So if we vote positive on this,
Yes.
this next one,
That's what it is.
All right.
so we need to vote on the original.
Right.
So we are going to vote on the original.
That's correct, because the
Because it was
amendment
Mark put
passed.
it forward, then there was an amendment to Mark's. That was the amendment that we voted on, that was approved. So now we're voting on.
But so the amendment
The
passed,
amended
but
motion.
technically you still have to vote yes on the original to make it actual,
Yeah.
because you amended that vote.
Correct.
You amended the motion.
I thought one canceled out the other.
No. The amendment changes the original motion.
Okay.
From
To add
two
in
to
that
one.
word, whatever the added wording or changed wording
Okay,
is.
so now we're
But the
voting on-
original motion still has not passed.
Right.
So now
so
we're
we have
voting
to
on
do
the
it.
We want to vote
original
yes.
motion,
The original motion
With
that
the
incorporates the amendment.
which includes the amendment.
Yeah.
That's us.
All right. Rebecca, are you with us?
Yeah.
Okay. So all in
She
favor?
was already there. She's waiting for us to catch up.
All in favor of the original motion, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you for your support with that. Thank you, Jeff and Tim, for your work in bringing that forward. All right.
Okay, down to the open
All
enrollment.
right, the last item we have, I'm going to turn over to Steve Summers. This is, open enrollment usually comes at the May board meeting. Last year with COVID, it got moved to June, and it needs to be, that leeway is not available to us this year. So this was an inadvertent miss for us to add to last month's agenda, so we needed to include it to tonight. So Steve, I'll let you kind of walk through the open enrollment piece for the board.
All right, thank you, Randy. Rebecca, would you mind opening up that cover memo first? So for board members, the most important thing to keep in mind with open enrollment is back in January, the school board was required to approve the number of openings that would be available for each grade level. So once that took place in January, parents had the opportunity to apply, but in Waunakee's case, the only students that we would accept moving into the district are grades where the school board determined that space was available, and two other situations that are identified in our board policy. One of those is for students who move out of the district. So if you move out of the district this year and would like to continue attending next year, our board policy automatically approves your open enrollment application, even if space is not available in that grade. The second situation is if you are a sibling of a student who has previously been approved for open enrollment, then you apply in a subsequent year, our policy provides automatic approval as well for the open enrollment. The memo does state that we have 230 students currently attending our district through open enrollment. You can see that at the bottom of the memo. We had 133 applications this year into the district, so that's higher than what we've had, a little bit higher than what we've had in recent years. And then you can see on the second page of the memo, the financial implications of open enrollment. There is a difference between a regular education student's open enrollment payment and a special education student's open enrollment payment. So you can see that on page 2 of the memo. And then Rebecca, if you wouldn't mind pulling up the list that has the open enrollment in students on it, please. I do want to point out an example for the board members of the automatic approvals that are granted through school board policy.
That was the only attachment we were given here, Steve, or we have attached. Was there 2 of them?
Yeah.
Yeah, in my board book, you see
There's 3 of them.
2 additional attachments. I see a list in and a list out.
Right.
All right, we'll find, we have to go back out and come back in.
It's probably, my guess is it was not saved.
Well, we got it on ours. Yeah, we
We
got
have
it.
it.
Yeah, it's on ours.
Look at ours.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so if the board members have it on theirs,
We do.
what I just want to reference for you is there's a column that has approval or denial on it. And if you want to look at 7th grade as an example, in 7th grade, you will see that no space was available, approved by the school board. That's at the bottom of page 2. But there are 2 students on the list for 7th grade that are recommended for approval, either because they moved out of the district and would automatically be approved to stay, or number 2, they're a sibling of an open enrollment student who was previously approved in a prior open enrollment cycle. So that's why you would see in next year's 7th grade class, most of the students, it says no space, no wait list, because as a board, back in January, you approved 0 spaces. But the 3rd and 4th students on the list, it says approved, and that's because they're under one of those 2 scenarios in our board policy that provides automatic approval. So if you look at this for each grade, then you would see what our recommendation is: approve, deny, or put on a waiting list. And that if there's no waiting list, it'll say there's no wait list. All of the different notes in that column are the administrative recommendation for compliance with our existing school board policy. There also is in your board book a list of the students who requested open enrollment out. We are recommending approval from our end for the students who are requesting open enrollment out. And then the districts that they apply to may or may not grant approval based on their school board's decision on whether or not space is available. So the administrative recommendation is to request the school board action on both the in and out students based on the recommendation column that's on both lists. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that any board member has about the memo or the students on the in list or the out list.
I make the motion to approve
Second.
Any questions?
both lists.
David?
Okay, so it looks like we only roughly have about 10 kids open and rolling out, roughly about a dozen, right?
Yep.
Because some of them tried for multiple districts.
Right, yep.
But then, when I'm looking about the denials, so when you put them on a wait list, it's in case we end up having more staff that then creates more open seats, correct?
It's either more staff or student withdrawals from that grade level.
Okay.
As an example, if students move out of the district that creates space, I would say it is very unlikely for a wait list to result in a student being able to apply, to be able to enroll, with the exception of 4K.
Right.
We may have some 4K students on a wait list who are going to be able to get in, because in the past, we have had wait list students in 4K end up being able to enroll by the time we get to the fall.
And that makes sense because of the third-party providers and everything. It's going to change a lot more. I do have a question on kindergarten, though. I saw some students, it was no space, no wait list, but there were 3 of them, or 3, that were put on a wait list, and I'm not sure I understand why. They weren't all pre-K. Some of them weren't with us at all in pre-K. Why were those 3 put on a wait list and the other ones weren't?
Okay, so let me look to, what page are you on, Dave?
Page 2 of the 3-page document on the ones that for approval or denial. And there were 3 students, and I of course will not say their names. But I was just wondering why those 3 in kindergarten were given a wait list, yet the other ones were all said no wait list.
You mean they were given approval?
No, they said no space on wait list. The approvals I get probably because of siblings or moving out of the district, if they were in pre-K. But I just didn't understand why some would be put on a wait list and not approved, and others not approved were not put on a wait list.
see what you're saying. I would describe that as a typo.
Oh, that was like reversing the N and the O
Yes.
to O and N?
Oh.
Yeah.
I would go with that if the N was capitalized in both cases, but I'm really curious now.
Yep, so there's no waitlist for kindergarten, and thank you for catching that.
It's the same on other pages as well, just
There were?
there is some on wait
On
list,
and
no
no.
space, but on wait list.
Okay, that makes
We
sense.
will get that corrected.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, there's one up in 5th grade. Yeah.
I see one.
Okay.
Some on 3rd and 4th.
So we should assume that in grades where you said, other than pre-K, there is no wait list.
If there is no wait list, right, it would apply to everyone except the students, like in the kindergarten example, who would be approved for one of the reasons automatically in our board policy.
Right, and they would have been approved, not wait listed.
Right.
Right,
Yeah.
okay. So I guess we need to say, approve this list based on typo amendments.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, good catch, Dave. Any other questions for Steve or discussion? So we have a motion to approve. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. And that brings us to the end. Anything else?
Nope.
Randy?
Thank you very much.
So motion to adjourn.
Who did the second?
Who did the first?
Who did the first? Ooh, you're fast.
Was it Jack or Dave?
Jack.
Yeah.
Jack, be quick.
He's on his way out.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
Great. Thank you all.
You wanna
Stay in here
spend
by
the night?
yourself.